Hi, my name's Damien. Welcome to Modern Astrology Session 2 for the Planets Workshop. Today we're looking at the moon. Originally I was going to look at doing the moon and Mercury together, but I think there's so much in the moon, and I'm such a repeat offender when it comes to going over time as well. Today I'm going to discipline myself, and not in the fun way, to try and bring this in on time and keep things going on track. That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to really focus in on the moon. One thing before we start, I just thought maybe we could just say our name and our moon sign. I'm Damien, I'm a Leo moon.
I'm Sydney and I have an Aquarius moon.
Hello, Sydney, I didn't see you there.
I like to sneak up on people.
Like a ninja.
Hi, I'm Carmel. I'm also an Aquarius moon.
Fantastic.
Well, I'll go because I'm Michelle and I'm an Aquarius moon as well.
Oh my gosh.
That's crazy.
I'm Sandra and I'm a Leo moon.
I'm Adriana or Adrian. I'm doing that thing too. And I am a Gemini moon.
I'm Michaelin and I am a Libra moon.
Fire and air.
I think, is that everybody? I can only see
Yeah,
6 people at a time. I need to change. Oh, here we go.
I think
there you
that's
go.
everybody.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you. That's one of the interesting things that came up today, and we were talking about it right at the beginning. We have an abundance of Leo and Aquarius energy today. So it's going to be an interesting session, and I can't wait to get started. Okay, so this is what we're going to be looking at today. Session 2, the moon. We're going to look at the mythology. I think whenever you're talking about planets, it's really important to get a feel for the mythology of that's helped us to develop the profile that we have for a planet. In the mythology, you see intention and you see evolution. You see the first critical minds when they brought these concepts to bear, and you'll see an evolution of the way that we conceptualize these planets in our mind. And I think when we can get right back as close as we can to the source, and mythology is often a good guide for this, we start to connect with why we use planets the way that we did. Everything else that we have has been built upon these foundations. So, understanding these foundations, I think for us, allows us to understand the connotation of the way a planet has come to be, if that makes sense. Yeah. And today, looking at the mythology of it, especially looking at the moon, I felt probably one of the best ways to look at the moon in astrology in its earliest and rawest forms is to get right back to the roots, and that's paganism. So we're going to look at that today, and we're going to look at some of the important figures in paganism, some of the goddesses of the phases of the moon as well, and that's going to framework our look at mythology today. Also, I thought we'd take a very, very quick look at psychology and look at psychoanalysis from the point of view of Sigmund Freud. And in many ways, this is a male take on astrology. Freud had his own, and it's interesting how much it parallels stuff that's already been discovered and already developed in paganism and Wiccan and Strega and witchcraft and things like that too. In a way, it's a male representation of a lot of that energy, and a repackaging and representing. We'll look at the rulership of the moon, the different areas that the moon has rulership over, and we'll discuss those. And we'll look at ways of applying the moon in the chart. So we'll look at the concept of the moon expanding. We'll look at dignity. We'll look at lunar nodes, and we'll also, at the end, look at the lunar phases as well. So the different phases of the moon, people born under that. I think we had a post in the Facebook group that Michaelin put up a little while ago that covered that. And there's quite a bit of insight to be found in that as well. So that's the manifest for today. Okay, so the moon. So like I said, I think probably the best way to look at the moon from a mythology point of view is to get right back to the roots, and that's to get back to paganism. Now, one of the reasons, and this is one of the big reasons I think this is important, is because divinity and paganism comes from within, and it comes from around us. around the beginning of the Dark Ages, one of the things that happened was the introduction of Orthodox religion, and it created this concept of a God that's not within us, that's not in nature, not around us, that's not Gnostic in any way. It created the concept of a God that's over there and up on high, and that you will only meet this God through good deeds and through effort and through changing your patterns in your life. He's something that you approach, and I'm talking in the context of, you know, the Inquisition and back in the Dark Ages, is someone you approach on your knees. And you won't know if you're worthy until you die, basically. So what it did was, it took away the belief that we're all connected to divinity, that we're all a part of divinity, that it's not just our birthright, it's incidental, it's happening all the time. We're a part of divinity, we're living in the natural world, and we belong to that world, and that world belongs to us. It stripped that concept away and created the idea of a distant God. Yeah. So when you look at the energy of the moon on the chart, the moon is incredibly intimate and incredibly internal. So I think looking at the moon from an Orthodox religion point of view is already misleading. And the funny thing is, there's a point in astrology, and you can see it, that happens later on, where the definitions of the moon become a lot more nurturing and homey. The definitions of Virgo become a lot more passive and you know, well behaved and microcritical and things like that. But the further you go back into history and all of these things, you see a completely different side to these energies. And I can't help but feel that a lot of the modern interpretations that we have for the moon are a hangover from this patriarchal society structure that's come in there, that's redefined feminine energy in a lot of ways. And repackaged it and presented us a more passive, more domestic form of feminism, if you like. So that's why I feel, you know, that paganism's a great place to start on this. And again, too, one of the principles of paganism across the world, and I'm even getting back to tribal paganism, and it's still here on the earth right now, is that we are connected to nature and nature is connected to us. So that's a principle, a constant principle that's through the heart of a lot of paganism. Yeah. So it predates Olympus. Olympus, we see an intellectualization, if that's a word, of the gods. You know, we've started to segregate, we've started to give them domains, we've started to give them personalities, we've started to give them roles, we've started to give them stories. And these are excellent ways to help us understand the way that planets and gods and all of these things express and you know, feature in our lives and help define our universe and things like that. But the earlier, more pagan approaches to a lot of these mythological figures is a lot more visceral. It's a lot more intimate. And it's a lot more overwhelming in a lot of ways. You know, these are absolute powers. And the two that tend to kick off paganism for so many, and every mythology in the world tends to start from these 2 points, is the sun and the moon. And of the two, the sun tends to be the personality, it tends to be us, it tends to be nurturing and warm, and the moon is always more mysterious, it's always more difficult to understand. It encapsulates a lot. So, you know, that's an important thing to consider as well. So as I said before too, paganism is connected to the natural world. It tends to fall into three categories. When you go right back to the roots of paganism, you have animism, where they worship animals. You know, the spirit and the essence of animals is a teacher for us, you know, and through that vessel we learn to understand and how to integrate with the natural world, because these animals and the spirits of these animals are so effective at it. They're excellent teachers for us. So animism is important. Totemism is a form as well, and you see these villages that have got totems in the middle. Totems can be symbols of animals. Many, they use an animal totem in the middle of the village, and that declares that this is the animal that's important to us. These are the essence of this animal is what guides our tribe and the way that we interact with nature and with one another. And the third one tends to be shamanism, where a person in a pagan group acts as a channel, a conduit in which they are able to communicate with the natural world and with divinity around them. The shaman is a liminal bridge between the world of nature and the tribe, essentially. And now what happens is over time and over evolution, these become more conflated, they become more developed, they become more nuanced. But for many pagan cultures, this is where it all starts. It tends to be one of those three. It can be animal worship, it can be ancestor worship, it can be a direct worship of nature, but this is where we draw from. Many of the pagan cultures too, when you go back to paganism, are also matriarchal. Nature is the interplay of life and death at all stages, and the feminine, the matriarchs tend to be the authorities on this. It's something that many of the earlier tribes subscribed to and believed. You know what? Back in the hunter-gatherer societies, the roles were more separated in that a lot of the time the villages were run by women. I mean, the women were in control of the day-to-day life that happened. The men could be gone for days. So obviously a social structure is going to emerge where women have more influence and more power within their social groups and things like that. And when you tie that to spirituality, there's an obvious connection between the two. So whether it's directly the governance of a village or whether it's from a shamanistic point of view, where a person is providing answers to the tribe that tells us, this is why this is happening in our world, this is what we need to do in order to overcome these struggles that are in front of us. A lot of them went back to matriarchal origins. So, and again, too, when we're talking about matriarchy in astrology, we're talking about the moon. So there's a connection there immediately between the two, and this makes this form of thinking, you know, a strong authority in this area. At least that's my feeling. And finally, you know what, paganism's managed to stand the test of time. These goddesses are still worshipped today by many pagans. There's been a revival in paganism and especially in goddess worship, especially in the last few decades. It's come back very, very strong. And a lot of it is connected to the reclaiming of feminine strength, of feminine identity, the ability to shake off the legacy of the Dark Ages, you know, where gender roles were redefined, where women who were shamans or healers or, you know, spiritual authorities in villages were hunted down during the witch trials and killed and burned to destroy that and sever that connection to nature, and then point everybody off to an impossible god who's up over there, you know, that you need to approach following this set of rules in this particular way of living. So we're seeing a resurgence where we're, you know, there's Wicca, witchcraft, paganism, strega, all of this is coming back strong, and it's very strong right now. So it's happening around the world. So it's something that stood the test of time. And again, too, paganism is cycle-driven through its connection to nature, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of the seasons, the cycles of life and death. They're all central and fundamental to paganism. And that's where we find our identity, and that's where we find our blueprint for living. We were talking about manual for life at the beginning of this. Well, for many pagans, for most pagans, to some greater or lesser degree, that manual is connected to nature, to the cycles of nature. They're in front of us, they're happening all the time. Anything from moon worship to even circadian rhythms, you know, realigning with the circadian rhythms and things like that, that all connects us back to the cycles of nature. Nature already has a way of living. It's only us who's deviated from it. You know what I mean? So paganism in many ways leads us back to this connection. For the record, and I mentioned this at the beginning too, I am not a pagan, I am not a Wiccan. Most of what I'm presenting today is research driven, it's experiential, it's from meeting pagans and Wiccans and people who are in this. But again too, what's motivating this is I feel that by looking at paganism, this is the best way to really, really understand and ground the mythology side of the moon and astrology. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that before we move on?
I do.
Okay.
And I appreciate you noting all this because you know, my family background with mixture of Strega and also my family coming from Western Africa and through the Caribbean before coming into the United States. Very much of our like daily practices were rooted in nature before imperialism and colonialism like wiped a lot of that out. And so for many, I'll even say like in, you know, the 20th century, a lot of folks, especially like that I know from where my family grew up in South Carolina, it was very much bringing back the roots. And one key factor of it was oftentimes looking at the moon or tracking the moon cycles. And it not only was this to see what's going on, but we're also talking about our physical bodies and how the moon affects our physical bodies. And where I'll say my mom's side of the family is from, is along the South Carolina coast, along the Atlantic Ocean. And so there's a lot that is connected to water with the moon. And how they kind of flowed with life went along with how the moon impacted the water.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Carmela. I completely agree with what you're saying. I'm Indigenous Māori, New Zealand, and it's interesting. When I was growing up, I think colonialism had almost completely destroyed Māori culture up till the beginnings of revival that happened around the mid-80s. And it was interesting because the kuias and the kaumatuas, the elderly people who knew all the culture when we were young, you'd go to the beach and they'd say, oh, don't do this, don't do that. And things like that, and you'd wonder where these rules and these ideas would come from. They all stem back to that pagan Māori earlier law, where this is how to interact with nature, this is how to respect nature, this is what our connection is based on. When you start to dissect them, when you grow up and you revisit these ideas, a lot of them are incredibly practical. They make a lot of sense, but also too rooted in that is a deep respect for nature and the understanding that we coexist at best with nature, and we do that at nature's, and nature decides the terms of the relationship. We're never here to change that. So, and I think I hear what you're saying, especially about colonialism and the rise of industrialization. We've willingly chosen to deviate from all of that. So thank you for sharing that, Carmela. Okay, cool. So let's look at some of the goddesses associated with with witchcraft, with Strega, with Wicca, and so on. So Selene, White Moon Selene in astrology, she rules the full moon. So the ancient interpretation of Selene was she was a Titan goddess in Greek mythology. She personified the moon, especially in the full moon phase. She's a central figure in the ancient Greek understanding of the lunar cycles and their influence on the world. In her origins, she's the daughter of the Titans Hyperion and Theia, which makes her the sister of the sun, and Eos, the dawn, as well. So she's already connected with the sun, and the full moon is the reflection of the sun against the surface of the moon. So it makes sense that she's a part of that cluster, that group there. Her domain is she's a goddess of the moon. She represents the full moon in particular. She's responsible for driving her moon chariot across the night sky. So you can see a connection there immediately with Diana, with Artemis. And this is like I was saying right at the beginning, what you see when you look at evolution is the evolution of these ideas and these depictions and the critical thinking and the understanding that we've given to the planets that now for us are symbols and glyphs on a chart that are moving around. There's been an incredible amount of work and focus that's been put into creating these figures that to a degree we may take for granted, when we're working as astrologers, when we see them moving around on the chart. Now, her character traits, she's depicted as a beautiful and serene goddess with a calm and gentle demeanor. She's often shown with a crescent moon on her forehead or wearing a lunar crown, which symbolizes her dominion over the night sky. So her symbols are the full moon, her chariots, and her glowing radiant light. And her portrayal often includes a chariot drawn by two horses, which emphasizes her role as the personification of the moon's journey across the sky. So, like I said, you can already see a parallel between her and a lot of the moon goddesses that follow. And you see a lot of the Roman gods and goddesses and mythological figures are extensions of the Greek. They're reboots, repackaging in a way, but again, too, the critical thinking of the Romans is applied to this pantheon of gods that the Greeks have presented. Now, in a modern interpretation, and this is, I'm talking about today, okay, Selene is venerated in contemporary Wiccan and neo-pagan traditions as a goddess of the full moon and lunar magic. She's often invoked during full moon rituals and esbats, which are like holy days, where her light is seen as a source of guidance and illumination. Now, her character traits, she's celebrated for her grace, tranquility, and nurturing presence. She embodies the full moon's energy, which is associated with completion, clarity, and the height of power. And you can already see a lot of parallels with Cancer, with this character too, the sign of Cancer. And that's the interesting thing when you start looking at these goddesses, they're looking at the same divine body up there in the sky, but they're giving these different interpretations and these different aspects and sides. And modern pagans, they view Selene as a guide through the darkness, a source of intuitive wisdom, and a protector during the night. Her influence is sought for enhancing psychic abilities, fostering emotional healing, and connecting with the deeper aspects of the self. So there's a deep connection between Selene and intuition, the enlightened intuition of the self. And during her rituals and offerings, devotees honor Selene with offerings of silver, white candles, moonstones, and water. Rituals may involve moonlit meditations, invocations for clarity and insight, and celebrations of the full moon's energy. I've heard Wiccans say before too, when you're sitting there staring up at the full moon, you're worshipping Selene, whether you know it or not. So that's just a little takeaway for people who are interested in that. Some of the
Also,
keywords.
selenite.
Sorry?
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but also the crystal selenite,
Yep.
because it is a self-charging stone, it has a connection
Okay.
to Selene.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so her keywords are the full moon, which we've talked about, lunar light, so the light of the moon. The full moon's really interesting for esoteric psychologists. It's quite important. We'll touch on that later. She rules the intuition, so in a way the divine light of the sun reflected off the moon rather than the sun itself. In a way, it's the moon is a mirror, if you like, if you will. So that's a way of looking at that. She rules dreams, emotional healing, cycles, the cycles of the moon, the cycles of nature, and so on. She rules the night, she rules femininity, and she also rules clarity. So the clarity of the moon. And when you look at the other goddesses, that word starts to take on a different meaning, I guess more of a meaning. So there we go. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. Hecate, or Hecate, depending on how you pronounce it from the Greek. Hecate is one of the ancient deities in Greek mythology who predates the Olympian pantheon, which means she was there way before the Olympian gods were even a thought. Her origins are somewhat obscure, but she's often considered a pre-Olympian Thanic goddess. Thanic means she has a deep connection with the underworld and the world of the dead. Her origins: she's a daughter of the Titan Perses and Titaness Asteria. Her domains is she is a goddess of many realms, including the earth, sea, and sky. Her character traits: Hecate is known for her powerful and enigmatic presence. She's often associated with magic, witchcraft, and the night. As a goddess of boundaries and roads, she is seen as a protector of those who travel by night and as a guide for those who are lost or in transition. She rules liminal bridges, spaces between worlds. In many of the witchcraft circles and so on, she's considered a progenitor, a creator of, she's the central source from where witchcraft is drawn from. She's very, very important in Strega, that's my understanding. She's a key figure in that. Her symbols are torches, so illumination in the dark. Dogs, so guardianship, nature of dogs, the loyalty and so on, that's a part of it. Serpents, transformation and growth and change and transition. Serpents are a symbol of that. And interestingly, we start to see some parallels with some of the scorpion qualities, specifically Pluto as well. And just remember, back in ancient astrology, the outer planets, the transpersonal planets weren't discovered. So a lot of the energies that we now give to Neptune, to Uranus, to Pluto, and a lot of the rulerships, they used to belong to the personal planets. And a lot of the traits of Neptune and Pluto especially used to be connected to the moon. So when you see a sign that's got both a transpersonal and a personal ruling planet, what you could be looking at is just a hangover of when that personal planet was the ruler for that sign. You know what I mean? So we're seeing the ancient ruler, we're seeing the modern ruler on the same sign. Now, and she also rules keys, which represents her connection to the underworld and her role as a guardian of thresholds. She was what the Greeks called a psychopomp, which is when a soul dies, when a person dies, she is a spirit that will lead the soul to the world of the dead with her torch. She will lead you safely from the world of the living to the world of the dead, and that was her role. Her modern interpretation. In modern paganism and witchcraft, Hecate has been revitalized as a powerful and multifaceted deity. She's revered for her connections to magic, the moon, and the underworld, as well as her role as a protector and guide. She's often invoked in rituals involving the moon, especially the dark moon. So she's the corridor between the full moon and the new moon, and is seen as a patron of witches and those who practice magic. Hecate embodies the mysteries of the occult and the transformative power of magic. She's a goddess of empowerment, helping practitioners connect with their inner strength and wisdom. For many practitioners of witchcraft and Wicca, she is a teacher to help women find the strength of their femininity. And I'm not talking about in the Kardashian sense, I guess. I'm talking way back to the origins, right back in the beginning when women were central and important and a vitalized part of the natural world and the social order. So she's a symbol for that for many. Hecate is a garden of liminal spaces, those in between places that are neither here nor there. And so in many ways, she has a deep connection to the world of the psychic as well. And as a protector and as a goddess to help usher us through this, she's especially important for many people who are in these realms, working with more astral energies and so on. She's also a psychopomp, as mentioned, guiding souls to the afterlife. Her devotees often honor Hecate with offerings of garlic, honey, and black candles. Rituals may involve invoking her presence for protection, divination, and spiritual guidance. Keywords: magic, the moon, the night, but in a completely different sense to the way Selene expresses the night. She's also a ruler of crossroads. We talked about this before too. She's at bridges between worlds. She's connected to the underworld. She's a Thanic deity, so she's connected to the afterlife as well. She's a symbol of wisdom, protection, transformation, and very much in the Scorpio-Pluto sense. And again too, you see these parallels with the outer planets. And she's a symbol of guidance. She's a teacher, and she's a person who will help people navigate difficulty and conflict in their lives. Any questions about Hecate before we move on, or any statements people would like to make? Anything people want to add? Okay. Lilith, the new moon. Lilith goes right back to the beginning of time. In fact, the Bible, some versions of the Bible say that Lilith was the first wife of Adam, but she refused to be subservient and left the Garden of Eden. She's also represented in the Kabbalah, that's my understanding. Her origins go right back to Mesopotamian mythology. And in the first session, when we talked about the origins of astrology, Mesopotamia for many people is where it first began. The first laws were written back by Solomon back in the times of Mesopotamia as well. So she's a central figure that's been there right since the beginning of time. She's prominent in Jewish folklore and other traditions. Her character has evolved over time, and she is a powerful and enigmatic figure. Lilith's origins can be, I have trouble saying her name. Lilith's origins can be tracked back to the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian mythologies, where she was considered a wind spirit or a demon. In Jewish folklore, Lilith is depicted as the first wife of Adam, who was created equally but left the Garden of Eden because she refused to be subservient. In ancient contexts, Lilith is often associated with the night, wind, storms, and sometimes as a demon or figure of chaos. She is frequently linked to sexuality, independence, and rebellion. Lilith is portrayed as a strong, independent, and rebellious figure who defies patriarchal constraints. She embodies the darker aspects of the feminine, often associated with seduction and power and the refusal to be dominated. And in her symbolism, she's symbolized by the night, serpents, and owls. These symbols highlight her connection to the mysteries of the night, wisdom, and the more feared aspects of femininity. So what we're seeing here is a complete inversion of Selene. She represents absolute empowerment, and there's nothing soft or nurturing about her at all. So she's in many ways the complete mirror opposite. In many ways, Hecate has similar qualities to her, but in a way, Hecate's are more externalized or directed towards the rest of the world. While Lilith's are very personal, they are applied to the self. And then we see Hecate in a way is already the journey from Selene to Lilith, if you like. So that's a a way of looking at Lilith. In a modern interpretation, in paganism and witchcraft, Lilith has been embraced as a symbol of female empowerment, independence, and the reclamation of the dark feminine. She's venerated in contemporary Wiccan and neo-pagan as a goddess of empowerment, sexuality, and the shadow self. She's often invoked in rituals aimed at reclaiming personal power and exploring one's shadow aspect. She's vital in shadow work for people who are looking at doing that, and working with Black Moon Lilith on the chart, you know, is an excellent starting point, jump point for people who want to do that. In modern context, Lilith is celebrated for her strength, autonomy, and defiance of patriarchal norms. She represents the unbridled, untamed aspects of femininity and is a symbol of the true self. Modern pagans view Lilith as a protector of women and a guide through the shadow aspects of the psyche. She is also invoked for strength and courage to stand against oppression. And in modern rituals and offerings, she's offered with red wine, dark fruit, and symbols of serpents or owls. Rituals may involve invoking her presence for empowerment, protection, and shadow work, exploring and integrating the darker, hidden parts of the self. One of the reasons that Lilith is so important for shadow work is the one thing that does not appear in her repertoire is shame. We own every part of us. We do so gloriously. So if you're gonna chase after Lilith, she's one of those gods you're either all in or you're all out. She's best left alone if you've got a weaker spirit. Her keywords are independence, rebellion, sexuality, the shadow self, feminine power, night, protection, transformation, and wisdom. So again, we've got a lot of those Pluto aspects, but yeah, they all lead back to the super personal and the self. In a way, she represents a super conjunction of a 0-degree conjunction of the moon and Pluto. Yeah. And even Saturnian qualities that are in there as well. So she's definitely a hardline goddess. Does anybody want to say anything about Lilith, or have any comments or anything that they want to share? Okay. And Artemis, she represents the waxing moon, the moon moving from the new moon to the full moon. She's one of the most revered goddesses in Greek mythology, known for her association with the moon, hunting, and wilderness. She's a major deity in the Greek pantheon and has a rich mythology surrounding her. She's the daughter of Zeus and Leto, and the twin sister of Apollo. She was born on the island of Delos. Her domain says she is the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, and the moon. She's also associated with chastity, childbirth, and young women. So you can see the transition from the new moon to the full moon. She's representing that journey in many respects, yet she retains the wildness and untamed nature of Lilith in many respects as well. She's depicted as a strong, independent, and virginal huntress. She is often carrying a bow and arrows, accompanied by a stag or hunting dogs. She's fiercely protective of her purity in the natural world. Artemis is symbolized by the crescent moon, the bow, and the deer. Her sanctuaries were often located in remote, wild areas, emphasizing her connection to nature and the untamed wilderness. It's the situation where temples were situated to the Greeks is incredibly symbolic and incredibly important. I can't remember. I saw a movie recently where somebody was worshipping Hephaestus, I think. And they had put his shrine inside the city, which he never did back in the day. He ruled wildfire, out of control bushfires and things like that. It was just stupid to stick his shrine inside the city limits. He was always outside the city. You know what I mean? So it was one historical incongruity I saw in this movie. And as far as Artemis goes, she's always right out on the fringes of the very, very edge, the bleeding edge of civilization. Her shrines are almost completely wild where they're situated. Modern interpretation. Artemis is venerated in contemporary Wiccan and neo-pagan traditions. She's often invoked during new and waxing moon rituals and is seen as a goddess of empowerment, protection in the natural world. In modern context, she's celebrated for her independence, strength, and connection to the wild. She embodies the spirit of freedom, self-reliance, and protection. And again, too, this really doubles down on the point. I mean, for many, the representation of the moon in astrology, and Cancer was all anchored in Selene, the principles of Selene, you know, the serene, calm, nurturing goddess and things like this. But the further we go back, the more we see that definitely was not the case. So it was just a subset, a particular aspect of the moon. The whole moon was cyclic the way that it worked. And rituals and offerings. Contemporary devotees often honor Artemis with offerings of fruit, flowers, and symbols of the hunt, such as arrows and images of deer. Rituals may involve invoking her presence for protection, empowerment, and connection to nature. Excuse me. Her keywords, obviously, the moon, but also hunting, nature, virginity, childbirth, independence, protection, freedom, and empowerment. So again, too, even she's fiercely independent. You know, we see that as a constant through the understanding of the expression of the moon in earlier tribes and cultures. Does anybody have any questions about Artemis before we move on? Or any comments that they want to make? Okay, great. So just to sum this up, so when we're looking at the moon, the phases of the moon, for the new moon, we're looking at Lilith. The corridor from Lilith to the full moon is ruled by Diana or Artemis, or yeah, I think they're the two names. There's another one too, it escapes me as well. The full moon is Selene. And then in the corridor, or the transition from the full moon back to the new moon, we look to Hecate as an expression of the moon. Where this is interesting is when you start looking at the chart and you start looking at the placement of where the moon is on the chart in relation to the sun, these start to take on a little more, more significance in our understanding of the way that the energy of the moon might be expressing in that particular phase in that particular time. So, and we'll touch on that as we go on further on. Okay. I thought I'd just throw this in there as well, just if nothing else for comic relief. Psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, this is probably the best male depiction of a lot of this moon energy that we talk about when we look at these goddesses back here. And when you just look at the keywords, it all seems to fall into line. Freud talked about the unconscious mind, the exploration of the hidden unconscious aspects of the mind, and we're already seeing that in these other goddesses. Psychoanalysis, the approach he developed with techniques like free association, and dream analysis. So we're starting to look at dreams and things like that. You know, we've got these shamans and these matriarchs have been doing this since the dawn of time. So I don't know what's going on here. The id, the ego, and the superego. He separated the personality out into these other groups. He talked about defense mechanisms, emotional defense mechanisms that we have to protect ourselves from other people and for things that we're not willing to understand or discuss. Childhood development. He was very, very, very focused on childhood development. Dream interpretation was important in Freud's work. The libido, sexuality was important. We've seen these goddesses who rule that, and for Freud, a lot of it was confusion about his own mother. And the mother is ruled by the moon as well too. So it's all this moon energy that's coming in. He talked about emotional repression and the ways that we may push down or, suppress emotions that create anxiety or fear in us and things like that, rather than face them head on. And also transference of emotions too. So this is all, when you stand back and you get a look at what Freud was talking about, and this guy's, respect to him. He was a pioneer of psychology. He introduced a whole new school of thought and things like that. The paganism's been talking about this stuff since the beginning of time. They've assigned goddesses to it, and things like that. So really what he's done is he's repackage that in a way that's ready for a more modern world and a more male world, a more male take. And a lot of the things that are in here, which were interesting to me, represent or are structured around the concept of fear of our own emotions, fear of our own instincts. And look, as a male, for many males, we struggle with our own emotional natures and things like that. So in a way, it's a very, very raw representation of that's been structured and delivered in a way that maybe we can start working with them. When we talk about discovery, it sort of feels like, back in those colonial times where some English guy rocked up on a beach in Africa and said, I have discovered this land. Meanwhile, there's, probably 20 African people sitting on the beach looking at him while he's doing it. It's already stuff that's been discovered. It's already there. It's just somebody's put a flag in it and said, you know, hey, I've discovered that this is it. This is my big contribution to the world. So I just thought that might be an interesting takeaway. And we're looking back to around the beginning of the last century. I think he died in 1939. So this is when this kind of thinking emerged in modern Western thinking, especially from a social and male patriarchal sort of way, I guess. It's something that cannot be suppressed. It's in all of us. Does anybody have any questions? So that concludes that whole mythology part of it. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or reflections they want to add on any of that stuff that was in there?
A lot of the work that I do is with the menstrual cycle, which very much correlates to each of the energies that you've just described from each of those goddesses. And just what struck me there when you were talking about Sigmund Freud was, you know, it's really the loss of that. It's the loss and the that word, the stigmatizing of the power that lies within the power and the wisdom that lies within the menstrual cycle that was lost to the world. To a certain extent, obviously, you know, it's still in every one of us, and that's Sigmund Freud's way of in that patriarchal system, just pulling that information out of him because it's still there, right? And it has to be pulled out and brought through in a framework that is acceptable for the time that he's living in. But yeah, all of these energies, all of these wisdoms and powers are there, and when they're suppressed by society, society's still looking for them. It's still, you know, it's going to continually search for them, and it'll still come through in whatever way it needs to.
I completely agree. As a male who's been in relationships with females, I have met all four of these goddesses constantly in my life. So I've met the hunter, I've met the nurturing soft, I've met Lilith, so and I've met Hecate as well. So I agree, and I think you're right. And it was interesting because as I was going through and looking at these goddesses, Freud popped in my mind, and you're right. And I think in many ways he was a sanitization of these concepts, and in a way a concession. You know what I mean? For so long, psychology especially had rejected the idea that these things were alive inside of us, but in a way he's a concession. You know, he's a surrender. Okay, this stuff's here, we got to do something about it. You know, it's not going to go away by itself. In fact, by repressing it, we're creating illness and unhappiness in ourselves and socially, you know. So you're absolutely right. So thanks for sharing that. I couldn't agree with you more in that. Does anybody else want to say something?
It's interesting because I was a psych major in college. And so I spent a lot of time studying Freud because that was thrust upon us. But I also was a gender studies minor. So having to be able to like extend and look at the students of Freud and how they actually like this, like Freud's attempt was to demystify, right, when it came to the feminine energy. And then you had students like Catherine Horney that was like, wait, hold up. We have to bring it back. And a lot of people don't know about her. There's like a whole institute in New York dedicated to her work. Okay. And I've also learned with the work that I do that a lot of people attach themselves to Jungian psychology.
Yes.
Especially around child development.
Yeah. And
they use a lot of his concepts and principles when approaching shadow work.
Yeah.
And not, you know, some people like getting to dig deeper. It's like, oh wait, a lot of these principles actually predate all of this. How we approach shadow work. You know, there are things in African cultures and Caribbean cultures like shadow monsters and having to face them. You know, and how do you go about facing them? And how is their presence in nature affecting you as an individual? And so looking at from the psychology angle and saying like, okay, this is how certain schools of thought came upon this. And a lot of it was really like, how do I demystify feminine energy at the same time bolster masculine energy and create an imbalance, which kind of like coincides with like systems of oppression. it's quite interesting how we can break apart nature to fit a construct that we want to create.
Well, see, what you're saying about balance too presupposes the concept that everything is potentially able to reach a perfect state, you know, where it sits there in a state of perfection and it's unchangeable. But we've already seen with moon energy, it's constantly cyclical anyway. It's constantly in a state of flux and change. So you will never achieve that perfect state unless you learn to harmonize with the cycle and the way that that energy flows and works. And I think in a lot of ways, Freud was a depiction of the struggle to come to grips with that. And in some ways, he, I mean, in many respects, if you oversimplify, Jung is the complete opposite of Freud in so many ways, you know. But they're both right. They're both right. In many respects, you know what I mean? And they're both fathers of thought that have given, I'm going to put this video up in the Facebook group. And student of Freud that you mentioned, if you wouldn't mind commenting her name in there, I wouldn't mind following that up. I'm having a look at that. Yeah. Most of these planets too, you could look at philosophy, you know, different schools of philosophy for every single one of them, and that'd help you understand and capture that. I mean, for the moon, you're probably looking at phenomenism, you know, where you're looking at experience, not knowledge, to guide you, life experience that you've had and things like that. And that would be a perfect way of capturing that. And in so many ways, it fits in with Freud, who's the struggle of phenomenism in many ways. So, you know, I hear what you're saying, and that makes absolute sense. Does anybody else have anything they want to say before we move? Okay, cool. So working with the moon. One of the best statements I heard about working with the moon is that the moon magnifies whatever it touches. Whatever it touches, it enhances. I'm not talking in the way that Jupiter enhances. You know, Jupiter makes everything swell and grow and expand physically. Its borders increase and things like that. Its quantity increases. When you see the moon close to the horizon, it looks bigger than it actually is. But you know, as it starts to move up across the sky, it appears to visibly shrink. But in many ways, from what I hear, it's an optical illusion of the moon against the horizon. Same size, but you put it next to something else, it seems bigger than what it actually is. And in many ways, it defines what the moon is. When you look at the moon, the role of the moon in the tarot, this is my understanding, Adrian, tell me if I'm on the right track. The moon is a light in the night sky, and you can see these figures, these shapes emerging into that light and things like that. And in many respects, a person will see what they want to see. That represents illusion and distortion and things like that. But that is the side of the human psyche that the moon rules. It can rule fear responses. The fight or flight responses are part of the moon as well. All that deep internal instinctive level stuff, that gut level stuff that's happening within us, it's all ruled within the moon. Does that sound right, Adrian? Am I sort of on the right track there with the moon? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I can't pick, my thing is forgiving me. I don't know. Phone.
That's all right. We know you have struggles with your technology from the last session.
Thank goodness.
One of the best ways I like to look at the moon, just as an example, this is my own personal way of a look at it. I look at dropping an aspirin in water. And the moon is the water and the aspirin is whatever you drop, and is whatever you're looking at. You know, it starts to dissolve straight away. You've got the same volume of aspirin in the water, but it's all spread out. It's all deconstructed and it's all moving in different directions, and it takes on a completely different shape and a completely different essence. Even its very nature changes. And when you look at the way the moon affects things on the chart, this might be another interesting way to compare and look at what you're working with there. So it expands what it touches, it magnifies, and you know, it can distort, it can change. Because the more we work with the moon, the less we're working with fact, the more we're working with our gut feelings, our intuition, and our instincts. The moon distorts. The moon alters memory. Has anybody ever done this before? You're sitting there on Facebook one day, you start thinking about an ex and you think, oh, I wonder what they're up to. And you start looking and things like that. You might get a bit nostalgic or something like that, completely forgetting the absolute train wreck and nightmare it was when you broke up with that person. You know what I mean? Because your mind now is just left of these happier memories and times and things like that you know, you might have had before. Or, you know, even friends and things like that. And that's a funny way that the memory works. You know, memory can be very, very selective, and we forget often the struggles and you know, just how hard things were back in that time when that person was a part of our lives. So the moon has a way of altering memories. You know, we remember the bits that we feel, not the often the reality or the way that things played out. And those feelings can be very, very selective. You can hear a song, for example, you know, and for many people, I hear a song, I'm straight back in the 80s again. So right in that moment when I first heard it. Distortion, memory strands. I've heard the way memory works in the brain is these engrammatic strands. The brain starts to create these memory strands where something happens and it starts to create these structures within the mind. So right from a young age, you know, your early prompts are pleasure and pain, and these centers in the brain start to become stronger and stronger the more they're touched. But then we have different experiences, and these strands start to build in the mind as well. So we might have one for food, we might have one for love, and all of these sorts of things. Events happen in our lives, and these strands start to connect to each other. So at an early age, we might have had something traumatic happen, for example. And so the center for family might connect to the center for pain. And in our mind, there immediately becomes an association between the two. The more we go through life and we see these things repeated and repeated, these strands become stronger and they start bonding and bonding and bonding. I have a friend who's an EFT practitioner, and she talks about how EFT is a good tool in tapping and things like that to disentangle these strands so that we can start to build healthier associations and things like that. There's other people doing work like this too, and ostensibly psychology does this too. You know, when you're working with a counselor, when you're working with an astrologer and things like that, we're helping to understand how these memory strands are connected and things like that. We don't control their structure. We don't sit down and we don't plan these things out. They just happen to us as life starts to unfold. A lot of these really strong foundational memory strands happen when we're so young that we don't have the critical mind and the intellect developed to be able to understand if they're right or wrong, or if they're correct. When you're dealing with people who may have strong personality things that are creating conflict in their life, people who may have unhealthy associations and things like that, they may be examples of these memory strands that are connected in a way that's counterintuitive or even damaging for the person and things like that. But these are all things too that would fall under the moon. We've got instinct, we've got these ideas and these beliefs that are deep set inside us that that predate our ability to sit there and think about, hey, well, is that really true or is that not true? You know what I mean? So I thought that'd be a nice way to look at the moon and look at the way that these different ways that the moon rules may express its way through the chart. So the moon triggers the subconscious. It rules the fight or flight mechanism right down at the most basic level. Every animal and creature in the world has a fight or flight response. We've got up to 4, I think there's fight, flight, freeze, and I can't remember what the last one is. I think it's something close to negotiating. I can't remember what the last F is, but there's 4 of them. And when a person is put in a panic state, when an animal is fighting for its life, it's going to go with one of those 4. And that's something that's pre-programmed into everything. It's a fail-safe. So, you know, when we're under attack, when you hear stories of mothers lifting cars off prams and things like that, you know, right in that moment, that whole adrenaline response kicks in. And that's something that's put in there. So you can see how psychologists struggle to quantify and measure this sort of thing. It's only something that'll come out in extreme circumstances. But at the most basic biological level, we all have a fight or flight response, and that connects to the moon. At a higher level, once we start living and once we start experiencing, that turns into instincts and gut feelings. We go into a situation where we might have had a fear response before, and we start, you know, all those goosebumps start coming up on the skin, or the hair starts standing up, and suddenly, you know, we get that feeling of dread. We've been in this before. This doesn't feel right. This isn't going to end well. You know what I mean? That's an extension of that fight or flight response. I used to do karate. One of the things I noticed is a lot of the black belts never did any kumite hand-to-hand combat side. They did all the forms, they did all the training and things like that. To get your black belt, you have to do the kumite side of it, which is you have to fight another person. And a lot of them, since they've never done it, once they got that hit in the face, and Mike Tyson famously had the quote, everybody's got a plan till they get hit in the face, they go to pieces. All that training goes out the window and stuff like that because the fight or flight response kicks in straight away. One of the best things you can do as a martial artist, and a lot of, especially Muay Thai does this, is start training yourself to reacting to being hit, because that dampens and reduces that fight or flight response. You know, your body doesn't go into panic mode the very second it receives impact. So that's, once we become familiar and comfortable with that fight or flight response, that distills down to the development of instincts and gut feelings. And for some people, they're very, very powerful factors in their lives. When you work with people with very strong moons in their chart, their instincts are incredibly important. They trust them, you know, more than intellectual knowledge. You can give them all the information in the world and they'll follow them. They won't follow it. They'll go with what their gut tells them or what their instincts tell them. When we take that to a higher level, I think we're looking at the development of the intuition. So the intuition, and for many people, for Gnostic people, people who trust their own inner voice, their own inner authority and things like that, the intuition is incredibly important. And it's something that can be cultivated for many people. I think if you're saying you're working with your intuition, but you may be working with your instincts and gut, your own gut feelings and things like that. There's this thing now where people are talking their truth. And at the end of the day, really what they're doing is they're just saying the first thing that comes in their mind, you know what I mean? And maybe the uglier the better, I don't know. For some people, they call that authenticity. I don't see it that way. You know what I mean? And that made me an example of that. Does anybody have any questions about this part? No, okay. Okay, so the moon rules the emotional body. One distinction when you're working with your clients is to make a distinction between your take on emotions and what your client's emotions may be. When people start talking about their emotions, especially when they start talking about them a lot, I like to ask them, well, what are emotions to you? How do you capture emotions? I'm an Aquarius, so I admit my emotional body's not that strong. So I've got very little water on my chart, so it's very important for me to understand how a client experiences their emotions. And that's a question that can be directed to your client and explored. That's a topic unto itself, especially if it looks like a person's emotions are constantly running away with them or getting into trouble and things like that. It's worth spending time to talk to your client and discuss that. Instincts and moods. So from the emotional body, it also rules instincts and moods. So, and I think that ties into a lot of what Sandra said at particular times of the month, you know, during the cycle. It doesn't matter what you know, and things like that. Your instincts and your mood are going to kick in and they're going to dominate, you know, the way that you express and interact with other people and things like that too. That's a basic example of that. But people who go to instincts and mood as a coping tool for life as well too. That's something that's attached to the emotional body, and that's something that's worth exploring. And that falls under the rulership of the moon. So the moon rules the subconscious mind. Paradigms, habits, and cycles. There's a good story I heard about paradigms somebody told me once. There was a young couple are eating a roast dinner, a roast lamb on a Sunday night, and the wife serves the lamb up on the table. She served it because it was her turn, not because it's a woman's job. She cut the bottom third of the lamb off and stuck it to the side in the tray and put it on the table. Husband's looking and he says, well, why did you do that? And she says, you know what, it's just something I've always done. It's something that my mother did. So, you know, I do it too. I just cut that last bit off and I put it to the side. It bothers her, you know, for a few days. So she calls her mother and she says, why do you cut the bottom off the lamb, you know, and put it to the side? She says, well, I've always done it because that's what my mother did. And just like her daughter, that bothers her for a few days. So she calls her own mother and says, okay, you know, I'm just wondering, why do you, when you roast a lamb, why do you cut the bottom third off and put it to the side when you serve it? She says, well, I've only got a small tray, honey. So what you're seeing is a paradigm. It's a habit that somebody's picked up off somebody else that they have not, you know, analyzed or asked themselves, is this a correct behavior or things like that? And we're all exposed to paradigms growing up. You know, regions, areas, if you for example, my understanding is if you grow up in the South in the US, the paradigms and the culture that you're exposed to are different to what you may grow up into the North. Everybody's got their own cultural paradigms and associations. A lot of these things go back to times way before the modern world, and we've still got these legacy ideas and things that we hold on to that are all part of our DNA and all part of our psyche growing up. They're no longer relevant to the modern world. So, you know, and this is all something that's buried into the subconscious mind. Scientists talk about DNA memory, you know, and things like that, although I don't think that's been proven. But it's a scientific attempt to explain a phenomenon that's obvious and keeps pushing itself out there in humanity as well. As we've seen, according to the pagan cultures and also to Sigmund Freud, dreams and memory are also important when it comes to the rulership of the moon. So past experience and recollection, like I said, sometimes we think about things that happened in our life before. When you're talking to a client about a particular person, especially relationship counseling, things like that, you can see a whole cycle of emotions happen in this person when they're talking about the same person to you, you know, in a counseling capacity and things like that. So being able to support, to filter those and understand and structure the way the person's experiencing their dreams and their memories and their recollection of the way things happen is intensely personal for people, and it's not necessarily factual. So it's something that, you know, benefits from deeper exploration. An interesting stat I read a couple of years ago is only 50% of the human race, and this is an estimated figure, are actually able to picture an image inside their head. The other 50% of the human race cannot. It's an interesting factor. I read it in a scientific magazine. I don't know where they get 50% from. Wouldn't it be fascinating if it was based completely on moon placements? Do you know what I mean? Or, you know, things on the chart, you know, whether you're a night or a day child, things like that. Wouldn't that be an interesting thing? And it's obviously a direction they'll probably never explore it. But when it comes to dreams and memory too, maybe having that in your mind too, maybe people they don't picture things the same way. I for one believe that Aries does not have the ability to picture things in their head. Maybe it's got everything to do with science. I don't know. I've yet to meet a pure Aries, what I consider a pure Aries, who could really sit there and hold an image of something in their head. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. That seems to be what it boils down to.
Oh, sorry. So what's again the 50%?
50% of the human race is able to picture something in their mind. So if you ask somebody to sit down and picture a calm, serene waterfall, for example, only 50% of the human race is capable of doing it. I can't verify that right now. I can't find the source for that, but this keeps coming up again and again. I keep seeing it turning up on social media.
In this group right now, can
Yep.
everyone visualize that?
Who struggles with visualizing things in their mind?
So we have one person who cannot.
I can't
So
visualize.
You can't?
Not really.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, I have seen things pop into my head, but when I go through a meditation and they say, see a certain light coming in your head, can't do it.
Okay. Isn't that fascinating? See, that
Well,
flips
But
it up.
everybody else can?
Yeah. And what do you do
Wow.
at that point? Smile and wave. Okay.
Exactly. I do.
Yeah.
Well, I used to get really stressed out about it, actually,
Okay.
as you know, my Mars and Virgo would go like, oh my God, I'm not doing it right. And then I finally had to surrender and just say, okay, I just can't do this. And I talked to enough other people. So I think I could see that stat probably being decent, because I've talked to other people who can't see it either.
Yeah. So you've debunked one of my theories as well. I felt that people who are able to visualize are probably more likely to be attracted to this kind of work, attracted to this kind of knowledge, things like that. But you've immediately challenged that as well. I sort of, in my mind, imagine it would be a prerequisite
right now. So
what's that, Sydney?
Yeah, right. I'm totally the minority.
She is a minority in our group right
She
now.
is.
So
She's the outsider.
Yeah.
I actually I struggle. Like if you say visualize a pink elephant, like I can, like it might come for a second and then it's gone again. And I'm not sure exactly how defined it is. And like that, in visualization, meditation doesn't work for me either.
Ah,
I'm
okay.
more of a feeling. I'm more of a feeling person
Yeah.
than a visualizing person.
See, our pink elephant has a backstory. It's got a family. It's got its own TV series. You know, I don't have a problem with that. It's crazy. You
This
know,
is really
it's
weird.
interesting though. You know,
This is
so
interesting, but also I feel like it might be a gradient because I'm having a difficulty imagining a pink elephant. I can imagine an elephant, maybe even a blue elephant, something in the same color of what an elephant should be, but a pink
yeah,
one is a little harder for me.
okay, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, there you go too. So who knows? Maybe when you're talking to a client, they're not able to grasp a concept or something like that. That could be a worthwhile question to ask. Are you able to
Mm.
visualize stuff? Do you hold things in your head and things like that? And if they can't do that, then maybe that's a tool that you can work with. That's a signal for you to, yeah, because how many times have you done some sort of spiritual counseling with somebody and they say, when this moment happens, just visualize a white light flowing into you right now, and it's illuminating everything and you're breathing it in and all of this sort of stuff. And if you just can't do that, then, that's not good advice. So,
I've learned for myself that there's varying degrees of visualization for people. So
Mhm.
like Sandra, you were saying like you might see it like really quickly and it goes away.
okay.
And then you have people who just can't do it. They may be those that have, I think it's called aphantasia,
Hmm.
or that you can't visualize anything.
Mhm.
And so I think there's varying degrees based upon whatever, when it comes to that. And I know that I've had people that have very difficult time visualizing, and I don't do the white light, like, see, I
Hmm.
try to come up with like more concrete examples
Yeah.
for people to visualize that come from day-to-day life.
Hmm.
And even if they still can't visualize it, at least they can hear it and it's something that's familiar.
Yeah.
So it's not too abstract, as it is for some people, like visually like a big ball of white light coming to you. Some people actually get scared. I've had that
Okay.
happen.
Wow.
And yeah, like I don't want to see a big ball of light coming to me. So coming up with more concrete examples has helped. And it's still, again, if they still can't visualize it, at least it's something that's more familiar to them than,
Yeah.
something that could be more esoteric.
Well, Freud would probably have words to say too. I mean, if you're visualizing this massive ball of apocalyptic white energy, that probably says something. You know what I mean? It's probably connected to something within you
Yeah.
and things like that. Okay, well, here's the counter question to that. People who struggle to visualize things, do you dream when you sleep? Do you still have images in your
Mm,
head and things like that? That's something I've wondered. Yeah, no problems.
lots of
Michelle's nodding
dreams.
her head there. So she's got no problems dreaming.
Well, I won't say no problems because my
Okay.
memory retention on my dreams are super challenged. But I
Mhm. I
definitely
think that's
see things.
Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
I think it's the
yeah,
conscious ability to do it. That's
I
hard.
think it's
yeah,
also the timing as well. I think you need to be in a REM state close to when you wake up
yes.
in any way for that to
Yeah,
Mm,
happen.
for it
Yep.
also
Yeah,
to you to even retain the memory, because a lot of
yeah.
times what happens is your body just regulates and that REM cycle goes out and then you don't really have a memory of what you dreamt.
I
Mhm.
think it's also relative to the dream too. If it's a good dream, you'll forget it almost immediately, or useful.
Mm. Yeah.
If it's terrifying, it'll stay with you all day. Um, so,
Something hot,
somebody doing
hot,
something bad to
elevating.
you, you'll remember, you'll wake up and if it's
Yep.
your partner, you're looking at them, why the hell did you do that? So,
I think that the visualization thing is connected to the clairs that you're more inclined towards. And so for me, it would be more just knowing. And
Mm,
so,
me
some
too.
people can see, like, their clair is clairvoyance, and
hmm,
so that's how that's the strongest sense that they have. And so for
yeah,
me, that's just not really a thing.
yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Okay. So the moon is connected to motherhood and nurturing. I think we're all familiar with that. We've all seen that. It's maternal figures, not just the maternal figures in our lives, but our perception of what a maternal figure is too. So, if you don't have strong maternal instincts, that can be represented on a chart. If you know, maternal instincts are complicated for you, that can also be reflected as well. Also, household and family are reflected on by the moon as well. The moon has rulership over that, and generally all that fourth house stuff, it's all wrapped up in the moon. Does anybody have any extra things they want to add to rulership or anything like that? Okay, I think that's pretty cut and dried. We know all this stuff, I think, to some degree. But again, too, probably if nothing else to take away for this, just remember that the way you experience your emotions and the way that your client experiences them, if you're wanting to do deep work with your client, especially if their problem is emotional and perceptual and things like that, then I think just being aware of that, that's a worthwhile line of questioning to go down. That's a worthwhile rabbit hole to explore. And that can help give you clarity about how to work with a client's moon, the way they experience emotion and all of that sort of stuff too. For me, that's a pretty common one, working with people, moon stuff. That comes up again and again and again, and understanding how they experience emotions, how they feel and things like that. That's really, really important. Okay, dignity. So we know the moon is in her domicile in Cancer. By domicile, she's acting in her full confidence and strength. So moon's in an excellent position from that point of view. She's exalted in Taurus. So the characteristics of the moon are strengthened when she's in Taurus. And we know that as well. She's in her detriment in Capricorn, so the opposite to her domicile position. Detriment doesn't mean that the moon's necessarily weak. More often than not, what it means is the moon can be very strong, but it's in a house or a situation or a placement on the chart that is not nurturing to moon energy. So some people having a moon in its detriment, the moon can be strong, but it can be an example of the wrong place at the wrong time. And a lot of it's also subjective as well to the way the moon operates. The moon for a lot of people is not, they're not that soft, nurturing sort of weepy, feely type that we tend to assign off to Cancer. And just remember, Cancer is a cardinal sign. It's on one of the angular houses. So again, it's incredibly subjective what that may mean. But a moon in its detriment can be strong, but that can be a catalyst for conflict and struggle in the life. Okay. And the moon's in her fall in Scorpio, which is in opposition to her position of exaltation. And a moon in its fall is weakened. The effects of the moon, the way the moon expresses, the way the moon operates within that house is often significantly weakened if it's the moon is in its fall. Okay. An interesting thing with the moon, and this points right back to the very first part when we look at the mythology of the moon, is if you're into sect astrology, which is looking at day and nighttime charts and how they change certain things, you get different essential dignities. You'll see that the moon is in her dignity in Virgo, and she's strengthened, and it's probably bringing through those qualities of Artemis and Diana and things like that. But you will also see that the moon is in her essential dignity in Capricorn as well. So that completely flips the script on the moon being in its detriment in Capricorn. And when you think back to Lilith, when you think back to Hecate and those initial goddesses and stuff like that, when you start taking demurity out of the picture, when you start taking even accountability, compassion, and all of those other things that soften the moon, when they all go, the moon operates just fine in Capricorn. In fact, it's strong there, very, very strong. You see somebody whose emotional body is aligned and strong and focused and fully able to happen. You know, again, too, we're talking about a new moon placement here. So, you know, that's probably somebody and if you're questioning them and you're seeing that, well, you know, their emotional take, that they are quite, they're tough, they're ruthless, they're confident and things like that, and you're not seeing that soft moon energy, it might be worth going off and having a look at where a Lilith placement is on their chart and seeing how that might be expressing and how that might be, you know, charging that up. A lot of people talk a big game about Lilith, but like I said, if you're going to work with Lilith, and if Lilith is working on your chart, then it's all in. It's not somebody who's dabbling with the idea of being tough. You know, they're not trying to be a social media influencer for clicks. This is somebody who can walk their talk, and they play hardball emotionally when they do stuff. They know what they want and they take it. And you may see that as an emotional trigger. Have a look, see if it's a nighttime chart. If it is a nighttime chart, then it's very possibly the case that that moon is expressing in a completely different way in Capricorn. Yeah, so that's something that's interesting to put out there. Does anybody have any questions about that?
What do you mean
I
by nighttime
actually,
chart?
If the sun is below the horizon in the bottom half, it's a nighttime chart. If it's above the horizon, it's a daytime chart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So if your sun's down here in the first 6 houses, that's a nighttime chart. And this is sect astrology as a whole school of thought in itself. It's a form of Hellenistic astrology, which points you off. If you like Hellenistic astrology, and Placidus is a form of Hellenistic astrology, it looks at the position of the sun and the moon in the chart. They're big indicators of how we interpret what's going on. Then sect astrology might be something that you're interested in looking at. And what that does is that just factors in night and day charts and changes and impacts that can have on the chart too. So that's something you may consider. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
I
Okay.
was just going to say, I feel like I've seen this in a friend's chart.
Okay.
And from what you said, I feel like it would be, and it's just gone through this insane journey with facing up to the tax department and the banks, and like completely flipping everything that put on her on their ass, and just coming in with all her intuition and really being grounded in listening to her yeses and nos and following that, as opposed to all of the external influence that's been bombarding her, and to really that don't exist in the real world for most people. And it's been an incredible thing to watch. And yeah, it was Moon Capricorn, second house, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. And money.
And so yeah, that balance of that determination and that strong will, and but also really deeply listening to her intuition. It's it's an incredible thing to watch.
Wow, that's a great place for Lilith too, isn't it? The second house. Give it to me, I'm worth it. Yeah.
Wait, were you talking about her Lilith placement or her moon placement?
I'm talking about the moon,
Her
but in a
moon
way, I'm
placement.
looking at the new moon is the symbol of Lilith. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
when you look at the chart, if the sun and moon are in opposition, you're a full moon by birth generally. So you can pick the placement of the moon generally, of the moon in relation to the sun on the chart. So if the sun moon are conjunct, you're probably a new moon, and that's especially if that's happening underneath the horizontal line. If it's a nighttime chart, that's something worth exploring just in itself. You know, a lot of people talking about Lilith, but she's one of those planets, the same as Selene. You can intellectualize it. It's even the same with the transpersonal planets. A lot of people talk about it. They look on the chart and they say, oh, this is what this means. This is what that means. But do we really live a lot of these things? I think you can tell when somebody's living Lilith, and you can tell when somebody's living the Selene on their chart. It stands out. It defines their personality. There's no doubt about it. And you can see those 4 different goddesses have they've got completely different roles. 2 of them are transitional. They show us energy moving from one to the other, and vice versa. But 2 of them are explicit opposites, yet they still are the same body and entity on the chart. So especially working with charts with women, the moon is a really interesting topic. Okay, just the last section coming up now. So just lunar nodes, just briefly. This is the point where the moon crosses the ecliptic based on the time of birth. So here's the sun, here's the earth. The earth's rotating around the sun. That line of rotation, we call it the ecliptic. Here's the earth, and then the moon's rotating around the earth, and that points it'll cross the ecliptic, and those are the nodes. So when it's moving from south to north, that point of intersection is the north node. When it moves from north to south, that point where it intersects the ecliptic, that's the south node on the chart. And they represent opposite points. Generally, when we're looking at the ecliptic, the nodes emphasize a point in life where balance must be reached. So we're not trying to be the north node generally. We're trying to transition energy from the south to the north node. And generally the sweet spot is that point of balance between the two. At least that's the way I look at it in astrology and things like that. So energy moves from the south node to the north node. So the house and the sign that the nodes are in tell us where the balance must be found. So if your balance is in the third house, if your south node's down there, that's the small mind. If you look at it from a negative point of view, that's the prejudicial mind. Up in the ninth house, which is where the north node will be, is your looking at expanded mind. You're looking at experiences, things that you learn from other people. That's talking about a journey moving from your own small-mindedness basically to a more expansive, more global point of view, more spiritual, more inclusive. Yeah. The nodes in karma. For many astrologers, they look to the nodes as a representation of karma. So the south node is a representation of past lives, of old karma and stuff like that, while the north node tells us about the spiritual direction of this lifetime, and it hints at where the next lifetime may be, and that's our spiritual trajectory. Me, I like to work with the big three when I'm looking at karma and astrology, but I know a lot of good astrologers who are very, very capable of working with those two, and they can get a lot of insight just from working with the nodes. I personally don't do a lot with the nodes. There's other parts in the chart I look forward to do stuff like that. And I'm looking more for the causal stuff in the chart too. But the nodes are certainly very, very powerful. And even in this group, there are astrologers who work with them a lot. I know that Antoinette works with them, and a lot of her insights are really spot on. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions about the nodes or comments that they want to make? Okay, cool. I did not cover this in my basic astrology in my introductory course. And I probably should go back and put this in because, again, too, I know that a lot of astrologers who like to use it. And again, that's just preference. It's something I overlooked. And that's something that occurred to me when I was putting this together. So just quickly, if we've got the south node down in the fourth house, and let's just look at the houses rather than the signs that they're in right now, and we've got a north node up in the 10th house. What might that journey be? What might the transition be for the person? What does the fourth house represent?
I would look at it.
Like
I always look
family.
at it as like the key to fulfill the destiny, and like one of the main ways to help like overwork the karma that we're working through in this lifetime. I always saw those energies as like competing with each other,
Yeah.
trying to
Okay.
pull you back to the past. The south node really like, I actually get a lot of information from someone's chart based on those two and the other planets that kind of like interact with them.
Yeah, I'm probably a small handful of astrologers who don't. I know a lot of people get a lot, and like I said, I've seen a lot of astrologers who use them. And it's not because I don't think they have value. It's just I tend to look for other areas to pick up on that kind of stuff as well. That doesn't invalidate them in any way. So I certainly agree with you.
So fourth node to 10th fourth house to 10th house would be like going from home and family out into the world of career and public stage, kind of working toward that.
Yeah, that's right. And starting to build up your own profile rather than, being invisible and at home and things like that. That's a great way to look at it. And for a lot of at the base level working with notes, it's as simple as that. You know what I mean? So if we were working from the second house, maybe in Sagittarius up to the 8th house in Gemini, how might you interpret that? We're looking at the south node in the second house. And a way of looking at it is quite often there's a temptation to stick to our strengths and stick to the easy areas in life, where we know that if we stay there, we'll be comfortable, we won't be challenged, we won't grow. While the north node is sort of trying to pull us out of that space and take us somewhere else where we can be more fulfilled and more complete as a person and things like that. So how might you interpret that, looking at the south node? And if you want to include the planets, the signs as well, have a take on it, have a shot.
My north and south node are in this position.
Mm.
I always kind of feel like materialism and money is trying to like pull me away from my spiritual journey.
Okay.
I also have this placement too.
Okay.
So like it's like your comfort, like your finances and what you need to have is like what you know, and I think your path is to, I guess, circulate or share with others, I think.
Yeah, that's right. But also too, it can be limiting. The area where you're comfortable in life, it's purely by staying in that comfort. You're not introducing new energies, new ideas, and things like that. It's interesting. I have used to have a lot of conversations with my nephews and nieces growing up. Again, to being Māori back in New Zealand. We're a culture that's really struggled to integrate with the social culture in New Zealand, the white sort of colonial culture and things like that. And so there's a lot of prejudice and a lot of thinking against white people and against work and against all of those things that children are growing up with, and mistrust and things like that. And challenging those with my nephews and my nieces and things like that. They're very, very quick to judge people. And these are the voices they hear from their parents, parents, and things like that. They're quick to judge people that they don't understand. Foreigners, especially. There's a lot of xenophobia in our culture and things like that. There's a lot of prejudice about what a man is, what's acceptable to do and what's not acceptable to do in tradition and things like that. So being able to challenge those in a holistic way, in a lot of ways, it feels like working with the nodes. You know what I mean? I remember one thing I said to them, look, if somebody's telling you that you can't do something, generally they're only pushing their own limits on you. You've got to go out and find for yourself what you're capable of. And that might be a way that it could work in the fourth house, for example. You've got family that are telling you, oh no, don't do this, don't do that, you can't do this, and all of that sort of stuff. You've got this influence all the time. And so you go out into the world believing that's the way the world works, and that's what people are like and things like that. Well, in the nodal representation, the opposite may also apply. The 10th house is saying, well, go out, meet people, build a career, put your neck on the line, find out for yourself whether that's relevant or true or not. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in the same small thinking of other people who've pushed that idea on you. You know what I mean? And that you don't even know if that idea is right. I'm pretty sure it's not. So that may be an expression of that. And the signs that it's happening, they further nuance that. They give us more information about how that might be expressing and impacting the person. Okay, last one here on this. So we've got a third house south node in Capricorn. We've got a ninth house north node in Cancer. What might that be telling us? Or better, if we were working with a client and you saw this, what might this be saying?
The third house is short trips, and the ninth house is long trips?
Yeah. Yep.
That's one thing that I see. And then the ninth house is higher education, and the third house is like primary school and stuff like that.
Yeah, community-based level education, immediate world. That's a perfect example of what I was talking about. These kids grow up around this culture. They've got these people who have not integrated, who are resisting everything that's happening, and that's become their reality, and they go forward with that. And for good reason. I know a lot of the older Māori, they had a horrible time in New Zealand. So there's a deep mistrust in them. But where's the point where you let that go? And that may be representative in this as well. Capricorn down there in the third house may be tradition. It may exactly be tradition, and rigid rules and expectations about that. Could be the father who's telling a son, this is what's important. These are the sort of people we mix with and things like that. Down in the third house, we don't move. You meet these people, I meet Australians right now who've never left the city. They've never left Brisbane, or they've never left the state. And I suppose that's the same all around the world. That may be an example of that, like you're saying, short trips and long trips. You don't really know anything
I actually
about
know
people.
a person like this. I should look into their chart.
Yeah. Well, you're the complete opposite of that, Sydney. You've lived the complete opposite life of that. So if this was on your chart, then you would definitely embraced your North Node. Whether you like it or not, I think you had a lot of Pluto going on there too, which made sure that it was going to happen anyway. But that's there too. Okay. And finally, I'll move through this real quick. Moon phase. So new moon up the top here. A person born under the new moon is beginnings, potential, and instinct. Waxing crescent, this one over here. Person born under the waxing crescent moon is growth, expansion, ambition. Actually, I'll flip through this because I remember Michael and you posted this in the group. Would have been a couple of weeks ago too. So that all information is there in the group at the moment.